Hi, everybody, and welcome to the KeenGamer Podcast. I'm your host for today, Max, and I'm joined here in the virtual studio by Tristan and Ben. Why don't you guys say hi real quick?
Hey, dude,
Hello.
how's it going?
Yeah, it's good. It's good, I think. We've got some exciting stuff to talk about today. We've got a few news pieces to kick off with, and then we're going to be digging into the meat of today's show, which is going to be talking about accessibility in games and what it is and how it works and perhaps what the future holds in store. But first, the news. So first point we've got here on the list, Niantic, who lots of us will know as the creators of Pokemon Go, have recently been tapped to make a Pikmin augmented reality game, which is going to release this year, apparently. And I've got an article on Polygon open here. It all sounds quite exciting to me because I'm a big fan of Pikmin. I think that they're really good games, and it seems like the kind of thing that could work quite well as an AR game as well, because there's already this sense in those games of like they don't necessarily take place in the real world, but there's this sense of like all the artifacts and things from real life and things. It doesn't seem too far-fetched to kind of transplant Pikmin into your kind of everyday life. And obviously Niantic have seen a huge amount of success with Pokemon Go and the precursor to that, Ingress. So I think the idea definitely has legs. What do you guys think, Tristan?
Yeah, it's funny because I actually, I'm probably gonna get shamed for this. I've never played a Pikmin game. I think I played like 2 minutes of one on the GameCube or whatever, but it's nothing I've ever touched before. I didn't get on the whole Pokemon Go craze, which is still huge. Like people sure it's not in the mainstream anymore, but it's still like their player base is very high. I don't know. Well, maybe because of the pandemic, I don't know what the numbers are like now. I know they did make some changes so people can play at home and be safe and whatnot. But I think it's super interesting. I'm curious to see what they do to step up the technology of it, because it's like Pokemon Go, huge success, all this stuff. But now how do they take that AR technology and amp it up and take it kind of to the next evolution and just kind of change it up and whatnot? I'll be very curious to see how that goes. And especially if they throw in the marketing of, hey, we made Pokemon Go, and people go, oh really? Okay, we'll play this. So I think it'll be a huge success. I don't know necessarily if it'll match up to Pokemon Go, because that was so crazy when that came out, so I don't know about that. But it's super interesting.
It's hard to imagine that any subsequent game will quite live up to the huge impact that Pokemon Go had, isn't it? Like it seems like it was something of a flash in the pan, because everyone was like, whoa, holy crap, there's this AR game and there's Pokemon and now they're everywhere. Like the novelty hasn't exactly worn off, because as you said, like it's still got a huge player base, but I feel like it's going to be difficult to replicate that scale of success. But they are clearly a very talented and dedicated development team, so I reckon Pikmin is in safe hands. What about you, Ben? What are your thoughts?
Well, yeah, what's his name? Mike McWhirter, the writer of the Polygon article, actually highlighted something that the head of Niantic Tokyo Studio said, which is it's going to be very different from Pokemon Go, which is just the quote on the Tetsuya Nomura, not Tetsuya Nomura, I think, is a Nintendo guy. Tatsuya Nomura is the head of Niantic Tokyo. Yeah. He actually said on Twitter, it's going to be super different, which I think's interesting. In my mind, if it's Pikmin, Tristan, you should play Pikmin 3. It's very good. If it's Pikmin, it's not going to be like Pokemon Go. It can't be the same kind of thing. And I think Pokemon Go, nothing has the kind of cachet of Pokemon, where it can cross the barriers of, I don't play games, but I know Pokemon. I like Pokemon. Whereas Pikmin is very, very niche, even for video game players. Like a lot of people who were Nintendo fans haven't played a Pikmin. You know what I mean? Like, I think Nintendo do weird things, and I think this is another one of those weird things. Hopefully, it's a proper sign of like working with Niantic more, because Pokemon Go is huge, and I loved it. I really think Pokemon Go is great. Obviously, I don't really play it anymore, but there's the first year it was out was amazing. I went on a big 2-month trip around Europe summer after I finished school, and I played Pokemon Go for way too much of it. I spent a lot of money on this great trip exploring all these different tourist sites, and I was also thinking, oh, there's a Charizard somewhere. But yeah, I think I'd love to see it. Niantic, didn't they do the Wizards Unite, the Harry Potter AR game, which fell flat pretty quickly? I don't think anybody I know's into that, and I know people who like Harry Potter, so hopefully this is, because I'm sure it was a good game, it just didn't hit in the right way. Hopefully Niantic can kind of have another success here. I like the idea that it's probably a bit more of a casual kind of springtime feel to it. Like Pikmin has a lot of greens, a lot of kind of like natural beauty. And I think they could bring that in, being like, if you're looking for a certain type of Pikmin, like a rock Pikmin is going to be nearer the street, and the green Pikmin is going to be in the gardens or in the forest. Like, things like that. You can see where they could go with it, and I think it could be interesting at least. Yeah,
absolutely. And yeah, I think you're right. As Nomura says in the article, like it's going to be very, very different from Pokemon Go, not just because like they are going to feel the need to do something different, but also like the mechanics are going to have to be, because you don't have the same sort of like gotta catch them all thing that Pokemon does. Like they're going to have to do different things with it, and I'll be really interested to see what they end up doing. You know?
And there's only a few dozen Pikmin, so if it was catch them all, you'd be done pretty quick.
Gotta catch them all. Oh, okay, I caught them all.
I'll get this done in a day. Time
to go back to Harry Potter Wizards Unite.
The thing I'm also interested is to see how it performs, because I think it will do well just because of the success of Pokemon Go. But like you said, they have had some failures here and there, like Harry Potter and stuff like that. And Harry Potter is a huge, IP, and the fact that didn't pick up, and Pikmin is niche, I would be curious to see how well it performs. I'm sure they're setting their standards a little bit lower than Pokemon Go, just because they're like, all right, non-gamers have no idea what Pikmin is, and gamers probably, some gamers probably haven't even touched one of these games or played very little and stuff like that. So it'll be interesting to see. And you said it's coming out this year too?
Apparently, yeah. They've slated a 2021 launch for it at some point. But
I'm just gonna say here, don't be surprised if it gets delayed, because development in a pandemic has been hell. Everything's getting delayed. So huge asterisks next to that 2021.
Yeah, the intentions are good, but the reality may be muddled.
Yeah, we'll see.
Yeah. But yeah, so that's a Pikmin AR game coming sometime. Next, we've got some very sad news for Sony fans across the board. The online stores for PS3, Vita, and the PSP are going to be permanently closing this summer. Now, I was never much of a Sony lad. I was brought up on Nintendo and then kind of switched over to more PC gaming, and now I'm kind of dabbling a bit more in Nintendo again. But this is quite a big deal, I think. Like not even the previous generation now, but the previous but one generation, PS3 and their and Sony's handheld offerings, the Vita and the PSP. You're no longer going to be able to download new software and stuff for them going forward, which feels like a very kind of closing the book on those consoles kind of move, doesn't it? So we've got the PSP and the PS3 stores, which are going to be closed on July the 2nd, which incidentally is my birthday. That's a terrible birthday present, Sony, but wow. Carry on. And then the PS Vita store is going to stay open for a little while longer before closing on August the 27th. So if any of you out there are looking to download any games or software for your long dormant PlayStation Vita, now's the time. Go and buy and download them before it's too late. Are you guys big Sony fellas, or does this not really mean that much to you?
Well, for me, it's like it's weird because like I am a huge PlayStation player. On both PlayStation and PC as my primary platforms, but I didn't get really into PlayStation. I was into the PS2 and then I skipped the handheld stuff, and I skipped the PS3. And then I got back on with the PS4, and now I have the PS5. So it sucks for anyone who, like, for that market, even though that market is probably very small at this point. But people still carry on to their systems for a really long time. I don't think it's very surprising though, because Jim Ryan has even said like publicly, and I don't remember what the interview was, where it was, but I'm guarantee you could easily find this. It's, you have Google, the power of Google to help find it. But he's even saying like how he just doesn't really care for old games. Like, I think he was seeing some showcase or something like that with some old PlayStation games, like PlayStation like 1 or 2, or maybe even some 3 stuff. And he was just like, man, who would play this? This just looks bad and looks dated and whatnot. And it's like, he just doesn't care. I think he's looking just towards the future. And so I think in that sense, it's not very surprising. But at the same time, what does it mean for the future in terms of preserving things and, preserving games and preserving services and stuff like that? I think it does leave a big kind of question mark for the future of like, all right, well, are they just going to eventually shut down the PS4, like store and like platform and stuff like that in a few years, which would be a huge shock. But at the same time, maybe if we get to the PS6 or 7 and they do that, it won't be as surprising. But it does leave a huge question for the future of not only their platforms, like their previous platforms and stuff like that as things move forward, but also what do other studio heads, Phil Spencer and the Bowser guy at Nintendo are going to be seeing that, they pay attention to the industry and they see that, like what's going through their heads, what's going through the other executives and stuff like that heads when they see stuff like that. I think it'll be interesting moving forward and see if this means something for the future, or maybe it's just one of those things that's just going to happen and we're looking way too into it. So yeah, who knows? But that's kind of just my read on it.
I think it's oh, sorry. I think it's really worrying. Yeah, you don't really have to worry about like God of War, Uncharted, things like that. Obviously, they're going to exist and they'll come over in some form eventually, or they already are. But I don't know. Did you guys ever play like Loco Roco on the PSP or something? Great game. Really, really amazing, Japanese made. I can't remember the name of the developer or really anything about it other than I loved it. Where's that going to be? And if I want to play that, and also like, I don't know, I've got a Series X, and if I want to, I can just play Fusion Frenzy right now. That's an original Xbox game. So I don't care what they do with that console because it exists on the new ones. So they can do what they want with that. I think PlayStation and Nintendo both have a serious problem with preservation. Wanting to play Fusion Frenzy doesn't lead to a very long play session, let me tell you. It's a great game, but I still would rather play the new Assassin's Creed or something, like something that looks beautiful. But I think it's really important to hold on to things, to preserve things, to understand that these things can just disappear forever, which is pretty scary. Yeah.
Tristan has his hand up.
I just wanted to correct Ben, you didn't remember the studio. It was Japan Studio that made that game.
Oh, okay, yeah. Excellent game. I don't know where that will be. I don't know if it's already on different services on PlayStation because I haven't been on PlayStation for a couple of years.
Who knows?
But, like I was just thinking about that game when I saw this news story and thinking, oh yeah, I'd love to play that. I'm not going to buy a PSP just before the store closes and buy it though. So,
yeah.
And that concerns me. I don't know. I think what Jim Ryan also said in that same quote was that it's something that is much requested but not often used. And that's true, yeah. But it doesn't mean it's not important. Most video game players want to play the new thing, sure. But I don't know. I think these things are important and they can lead to big gains. Like Xbox has seen it already with their, like, I'm playing Dishonored 1, the original right now, and it's at 60 FPS because of all of their backwards compatible teams work. And they're so focused on it. And that's a benefit for Xbox. But it also means that they can keep this legacy of games kind of safe. Like, I think about it with Nintendo all the time. All these strange games that just don't exist. Like, you could have played them on the Wii or the DS, but you can't play them on the Switch. And then as those stores close, you know what I mean? It's just, what if I want to play that? It just doesn't exist anywhere. And in 40 years' time, how do we even tell people it was real? You know what I mean? Thank God for ROM hacks. You know what I mean?
That's a horrifyingly existential thought.
Yeah.
Just like in a few decades' time, we'll just be looking back on all these weird games and be like, "Was that just a fever dream?" Weird. But
We're
yeah,
gonna have some Lost Planet 2 deniers.
Yeah. But yeah, it's funny you bring up Nintendo, because like they definitely have a complex relationship with game preservation, I think, because like there's a ton of NES and Super Nintendo games that you can play on the Switch now through the through a Switch Online membership. But you're right, like it's not everything, and like they're also notoriously litigious, I think, coming down on people who make ROM hacks, like say, and like emulation sites and things like that. Like they really bring the hammer down on anyone who is like trying to fill the gap that they're creating by not preserving their back catalog in a meaningful way, which is
good thing they're not on the
frustrating.
PC platform. Imagine if Nintendo hopped on the PC train. Man, they'd have a tough time, because the modding community would just give them a headache.
They would have DRM for days. Oh, God.
But I think like the Switch Online is like a handful of Nintendo games. It's a drop in the ocean. Like there was a version of Super Mario Bros. On Wii, I think. Don't quote me on this. Where somebody looked at the code and how it was put together, and everyone was like 90% sure it was from a ROM of something that was on a ROM hack site that Nintendo had then utilized to fill in gaps in their own code. And there's a really good video about it, in depth, like tells the truth about it all, if you know what I mean. I may be over exaggerating slightly, but if there's any truth in that, then there's proof that Nintendo has found a massive benefit from the fact that exists.
Yeah.
And the reality is Nintendo's not making any money off of 90% of its back catalog. And I understand they have every right to protect it, but they also need to make sure they preserve it properly. And there's been evidence to suggest that they're not, and that these things aren't looked after. And the institutions like I've forgotten Frank Cifaldi's institution for game preservation, like that, they need to be bigger, they need to get more funding, and they need to get support from big game developers. And I think that's really important.
Yeah, absolutely. On a slightly different note, but still on the same story. So the closing of the PSP and the PS Vita stores, and obviously the discontinuation of those consoles, means that Sony's effectively out of the handheld market now. Do you guys think they'll ever venture back in, or do you think they'll be sticking to home consoles for the foreseeable future?
Soon.
Yeah.
I think
they
Switch is like over dominated. I think it's probably scared everybody away.
Yeah, it's kind of sewn it all up, hasn't it? The handheld market.
Yeah, and they have their whole goals and whatnot of what they want to do, and like really are focusing on in terms of like really impressive single player story driven games, are pushing tech and pushing storytelling and video games and stuff like that. And I think they gave their college try of handhelds and stuff like that. It's like, okay, I remember the PSP being like, oh yeah, that was really cool and stuff like that. And then when the Vita came out, it wasn't on my radar. It just people were talking about the Vita. I'm like, do you mean the PSP? And I was very confused. For like, I'm not joking. It must have been a couple years the PS Vita, just because it's like that thing just tanked, you know?
Yeah.
And I think that's what soured it for them. And honestly, they don't need it. Sony does not need the handheld market. You know, at least for now. Maybe they could always go back to it in a few years or whatever, and maybe things will be different then for them. But yeah, for now, it's hey, PS5's killing it. You know, obviously there's shortages and stuff like that, but it's still selling well. You know, the actual numbers are really good, and the games are selling like really well and stuff like that. So, you know, they don't need it. You know, and also they're looking into PC and stuff like that, like more. PlayStation games are coming to PC and stuff like that, so they're looking at that market. So I think if they just kind of spread themselves a little bit, you know, and they look at different markets and whatnot, I think it'll be fine. And honestly, it's hard to compete with Nintendo on the whole handheld thing. They have that locked down. They've had it locked down for forever. So it's hard to walk into that room and try and put up a fight against that.
Yeah. I think one possibility of something that we might see, and Sony, as I understand it, hasn't really ventured as much into this sphere as other big companies like Microsoft and Google, of course, but like with the improvements in mobile technology, like phones and stuff, and things like game streaming services, and like a big selling point of those is like, oh, you can play like God of War on your phone, or whatever. Like we like I feel there's a possibility we might be seeing Sony kind of maybe dipping their toes into that particular pool, like not dedicating themselves to like just like a solely handheld console, or even something like the Switch, which is a hybrid, but like maybe putting some resources into the kind of mobile gaming arena and seeing if they can.
Yeah, well, they have PlayStation Now,
that.
which is their cloud gaming subscription service or whatever. So it's like they could branch that into that realm of, oh, hey, you can play Doom on your phone, or play, Last of Us or God of War or whatever. So stuff like that. So yeah, I think that's a possibility, especially since they already have at least their toes dipped into that world, and they could expand, especially when competing against Microsoft and whatnot. We've seen them make some moves that have been vaguely similar to some moves that Microsoft's been doing, and so it's okay. I see what you're doing, Sony. So
Sony did make a deal with Microsoft to utilize Azure Cloud, but maybe a year and a half, 2 years ago. I don't know how long ago.
Yeah.
I think like PS Now, for what it's worth, is a great service, and I think PlayStation needs to move quickly on what they're going to do next for their service side of things, with where Xbox is moving, or Microsoft is moving. I don't think they'd put a handheld out, but they do probably are thinking, as a Japanese company, how do we claw back some market share in Japan, because the Switch is completely dominated. I'm sure they'll be looking at ways to do that, but I also am sure that they're more than happy with winning the home console war versus Xbox, and which by all reports they still are. So well, they definitely are. So like I think they're probably happy with that, but they must be thinking about ways to get some market share back in Japan, and handheld's a big part of that. But then again, like you look at it, and the new Monster Hunter's only on Switch, and Dragon Quest comes to Switch. Like if they can start snapping things, like they got Dragon Quest a year early on PlayStation, if they could turn that into a way of saying you can play it a year early and it can be on your phone, that could be a good way for them to get back some different players.
Well, I know that Microsoft's really trying to do that too. They've made a huge push to try and really establish themselves in Japan, because while PlayStation, they're well established in Japan and like Eastern countries and stuff like that, but Microsoft, like Xbox, really is pretty much like a Western world type of gaming console and platform. They've
sells really well in China as well.
Yeah,
it sells really well in China.
But Japan, it just doesn't resonate, as much. So I know they've pushed a lot of that, and I know with xCloud and being able to play games on your phone, so like that really helps a lot, because man, the mobile gaming scene in Japan is it's crazy. And I think most Americans, at least, speaking as an American, I think most Americans don't really realize that. I don't know how much about for you Europeans, but in America, I think the average person does not realize how huge it really is over there. Especially with mobile
I think
gaming.
it's probably pretty similar here.
Yeah, probably. A bunch of white people don't know what's going on. Yeah. Nothing new there.
Know what's up?
Also, before we leave that story, I just want to give a shout out to Kirk McKeon, who got the report on that for The Gamer. His tagline for that was "Hasta la Vita, baby," which is just very
awesome.
good.
11 out of 10, huge dad energy.
Yeah, exactly.
But yeah, well, to in fact circle back to Monster Hunter, which Ben recently brought up. So if you're listening to this episode on the day it comes out, which, as we all know, is Thursday every week, you will have one day, if that, to prepare for the release of Monster Hunter Rise on the Nintendo Switch. But even if you're planning on taking the day off work for it, you will no doubt be annoyed to hear that at least one employer is going that step further and is giving all of his employees the day off in order to play Monster Hunter. There's a VR development company, MonHun, in Japan, the CEO of which, after talking with several of his employees who told him that they were planning on taking the day off anyway, has decided to celebrate MonHun Day by just giving everybody a day off so they can pick up the game, play it, and have a bit of a long weekend. Now, Ben, I know you're a big Monster Hunter fan. Are you planning on celebrating the holy MonHun Day?
Yeah, so I've pre-ordered the collector's edition because I'm an absolute idiot. And I'm just hoping it comes early on Friday because I'm moving house on Saturday. And then I'm starting a new job on Monday. So the Sunday, I'm not going to really be sitting around playing games. I'm going to be setting up the new place and things like that. So Friday is my one day to kind of be like, you know, if the package comes at 10 a.m., you will not see me until, 2 a.m. And then I'll fall asleep and wake up. I want to just dive right into it. I think this is excellent. Just because, I can imagine if a massive game comes out and everybody, it's such a phenomenon that everybody in your workplace is just talking and thinking about going home. You're like, well, why don't you just go home then? You all go play it, have a nice time, and then when you come in on Monday, be grateful that I gave you that time off.
Yeah.
It kind of reminds me of, there was this weird urban legend that they released Dragon Quest in Japan on weekends because students always skipped school on a release day, so they decided to shift it to a weekend, which I think was kind of untrue. Joe Screbbles did a great report on it for IGN if anybody's interested, but things like that, like I love the idea that it's such like a video game can be such a big deal that business is just like, yeah, let's turn off the lights for the day. There's no point. Everybody's head's going to be elsewhere. They'll be thinking about when they're going to get to the Rathalos.
Oh, great. So what do you get for the collector's edition of Monster Hunter Rise? What makes it worth the extra cash?
Well, you get the deluxe edition, which comes with some extra armor, which is obviously excellent.
Yeah.
But then you also get this big amiibo. I can't remember the name of the monster. It's one of the new monsters in the game. But I've been busy writing about other things, so my head's full of other made-up things that video games give me.
The perils of video game journalism.
Yeah, but no, you just get a big amiibo, and I know it would be impossible to find. And I have a few up here on my shelf, a few little amiibo, and I stopped collecting them because I realized how stupid I was. But I kind of want to get back into it, and now I've got a consistent job instead of like 2-month contracts. I'm very excited to actually buy some amiibo.
Nice. Collector's editions.
Yeah, that's the first time I've ever bought a collector's edition. I'm not that person. I don't buy every collector's edition. It's the first one.
There's nothing to be ashamed of, Ben.
I'm deeply ashamed.
So Tristan, if you're not as much of a big Monster Hunter head as Ben is, what one game that's coming out this year would you like to be officially given the day off for?
Well, okay, so before I get that, I do want to comment on the story though, because and also give my history of Monster Hunter, which is very, very, very brief. I only knew about Monster Hunter because I had a freshman year of high school, so this was 2012, I think, somewhere in there, 2012, 2013, and I had a class of a guy who talked about Monster Hunter all the time, and I'm like, I don't know what that is. I don't understand. And then I played like maybe an hour or two of Monster Hunter World. That was like the last big one, right? Monster Hunter World. So I played a little bit of that. I just could not get into it. It was so much to take in, and there's like the tutorial of it is like the first like couple hours of the game is it teaching you stuff. And I don't have the time commitment for a game like that. I just can't. There's super cool games and stuff like that, but I know this one is reviewing really well and people really love it. I actually have a Gene Park from Washington Post actually put up his review. I think it's in progress. I don't think they're I think he's still working on the game, so I think he just put up like an early thing of it or whatever. I'm not too sure. But this is just the headline: is Monster Hunter Rise is the most ambitious Nintendo Switch game in a long time, and he praises it and stuff like that. His first sentence is, "I can hardly believe a game this large that runs this smoothly exists on the Nintendo Switch." And he even says at the end of the article too, people should go really read it. Gene Park's great. He also said it's like probably the best one to date, best like Monster Hunter games to date, and it's easily a contender for Game of the Year for the year. And it's that's wild, and it's not really a thing for me, but it's awesome for people like you guys, the Nintendo fans, because I'm just not really their games just don't resonate with me and stuff like that. But if I had to take the day off for something, it'd be Ratchet and Clank. I love Insomniac, and I've talked about how much I love Insomniac many times in this on this podcast and stuff like that. So I would say that, or Deathloop, one of those two. I would probably just be like, hey, I'm not editing anyone's articles today. I'm going to be playing games. That's probably nice. How it's going to be. But there is something about Rise I do want to talk about that is actually think super interesting. At least it's an interesting move in terms of the development side is. I don't know if you guys realize what the engine it's using, but it's the RE engine actually. The Resident Evil engine that they developed for Resident Evil 7 actually, which the only other non-Resident Evil game to use it so far has been Devil May Cry 5. But I think it's super interesting that they were going to be using that tech, and they're kind of expanding that engine, which is a great move because that engine is just so impressive, like unbelievable. And especially like what they were able to do with it with the Resident Evil 2 and 3 remakes and Resident Evil 7, and just from what we've seen of Village 2 and the fact that they're putting that into something else like Monster Hunter, I think is a brilliant move, and it's probably why it's so impressive looking on the Switch, which is a little shocking because that is one thing of Nintendo. They're always behind everyone else in terms of tech, in terms of power and whatnot. Apparently they're coming out with a more powerful Switch and whatnot, which we'll see what that looks like.
Rumors circulating.
Yeah, which I think if will eventually come true, at least to some capacity, But it's super cool that they're actually like this far in, and they're actually being able to develop actually impressive games that actually run well on the Switch. Because it's like, I remember when they first showed the Switch, and I'm like, this looks really cool, and I'm sure some games are gonna be really great. Like Breath of the Wild was like probably the most impressive game on there, but it was just like, but also made sense that it could still run despite being a massive open world game. It's still like this in terms of the art style and like like all the how the world was designed and whatnot very much fits the Switch, and it's like, wow, I can't believe they're putting this out on the Switch, and apparently it's reviewing really well. So it's quite a shock, but really impressive stuff actually that people are doing with the Switch, which can be very difficult as a developer when you're trying to make a really impressive, cool looking game and you're limited on Nintendo always being a couple years behind everyone else. I don't know what their deal is, but that's.
I think that's why Capcom went for a sequel to Monster Hunter World being just on the Switch. They probably just wanted to focus on it. I think it's really interesting that they used the RE engine as well, because they didn't use it for World, and World's gorgeous, like a really good looking game. So I think one, it's interesting that the RE engine is working this well on Switch, and two, that it seems to be like that easy to transfer over, because from what I played of Rise, it's quite similar to World. It's also really similar to some of the other handheld stuff like Generations and 4. It feels like a bit of a halfway house. But I just think that's interesting. Like if they could find a way to do a Devil May Cry spin-off that looks pretty on the Switch, or, what I mean, anything like that, it's just very exciting. And I think the RE engine makes some beautiful stuff. Anything wet in the RE engine looks wonderful. So it'd be nice to see some wet things on the Switch.
Yeah, definitely.
Never thought I'd hear that.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think it's absolutely the sign of a very impressive and a very versatile game engine. And I hope to see loads more stuff, wet or otherwise, in the RE engine in the future. But so Monster Hunter Rise coming out in a few days' time. Currently sitting pretty at 86 on Metacritic. We'll
Oh, nice. Very good.
see if that changes
I
at
think I'm
all as more
reviewing
reviews start coming out. Aha,
I'll
cool.
be doing a review for that. So if I can put 11 out of 10, I'll put it.
That'll knock it up to 100.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, people
Fab.
can check out Ben's review whenever it comes out. We'll update readers and listeners and
Next
whatnot.
next week sometime.
Probably next week. Yeah. So keep an
Once
eye
you're settled in the new place and all.
Yeah.
Nice. Cool. Well, that's all the news for this week. But we've still got plenty in store for you. Today, I wanted to talk about accessibility in games. It's somehow still a bit of a hot button topic, I think, in the world of video games and game design and game consumption. But for me, like the most important thing about it is that, like, in my opinion, video games should be for everyone. And if there are ways to make that so, and to make them not just appealing, but like playable to as many people as possible, I think that people should do that. But before we like get really stuck into it, I just wanted to ask you guys, like, what immediately comes to mind when I say accessibility, with regards to video games, obviously. Like, what's the first thing?
Yeah.
leaps to your
For
mind?
me, I think of immediately just like seeing disabled gamers with disabilities and stuff like that, and like how they can make games more accessible and stuff like that. Like Microsoft has like made some great strides and stuff like that with the technology they've developed and whatnot. And even games too. It's like now it's like when a developer is like, hey, this little presentation of our game and blah, blah, blah. This is what you'll be doing. This is the story. This is the world, blah, blah, blah. And here's some accessibility stuff we'll be working on and stuff like that. And like, I remember Last of Us 2, everyone was so impressed by like the steps it made for accessibility. And even like, I didn't turn on any of that stuff because I personally don't need it or whatever. But I did look through it when I first got that game. I'm like, let's see what the all hubbub is about. And I'm like, wow, this is really extensive. And they even won an award for accessibility at the Game Awards last year too. Very well deserved. That game deserves all the awards. I think it's great. But it's like stuff like that is like what comes to mind of one who that is for, but also people or companies that are doing it right and pushing it forward.
Yeah, nice. What about you, Ben?
I'm on a pretty similar page. I think it's really effective and affecting to see disabled gamers just talk about it. It's obvious in my mind that games should be for everyone, but it's also not always obvious, and it wasn't to me until I listened and read about it, how many different aspects of a video game can be a barrier for somebody. It's not just, physical disabilities and I can't use a controller. There's like a dozen different ways. If you're playing a point and click adventure and you suffer from a dyslexia, you're going to struggle more with a word-based puzzle, probably, and things like that. And there's so many different layers there. And obviously, games can't be everything at once, and they can't have a slider for every single option, but there's a lot more that games can definitely do just beyond colorblind modes and subtitle sizes. Like, there's a lot more, as The Last of Us 2 showed, that the game itself can do. There's a lot more that the game developers can do. Like Nintendo has quite a long way to go, I think, with that sort of thing. But then you see Xbox just really pushing for it, putting out a really reasonably priced controller that kind of allows lots of different people with different disabilities to play games. And
yeah, the Xbox
I think that's
adaptive controller, if anybody wants to look it up.
Yeah, and it's only like a tiny bit more than a normal controller.
Yeah,
so, I think that's the main thing in my head is like when these discussions happen, like you said, they can be a bit of a hot button topic, but the person who's on the other side to where we're coming from often hasn't listened enough or talked enough or read enough about it from people with disabilities who just want to enjoy these things that are basically just toys. You know what I mean? And that's something I think, everybody should have the ability to do. Yeah.
I think like often when people are approaching this subject from the other side, as you say. I think part of the fear that a lot of them have is that resources that go towards kind of creating options and making content that is accessible for more people potentially detracts from, like, say, the amount of content in the game overall, and they don't like that idea. I think it's like I think that's a bit of a fallacy, especially since there's a difference, I think, in the game development process if you're planning for accessibility from very early stages of development and production versus if it's something that you try and throw in much later on, and then you've got all this stuff in place and you're having to kind of tweak and change things on the fly in order to try and make it work, and then you have to pull resources from one area in order to try and fix this thing in another, and that does make it harder. But if you plan and budget for it from the beginning, then as I understand it, like, there's no reason why designing accessible content detracts from like the game overall. And I think, as you said, Ben, like, part of it is a lot of these people who are against the idea like don't necessarily read or listen as much about it, and so they go in with certain assumptions which then kind of have to be countered. But yeah, so a lot of my reading and listening about it, I attribute to a guy called Mark Brown on YouTube. And last year or the year before, I think, he did a series of 4 videos called Designing for Disability. He's got a very, very chilled out, relaxing English accent and just talks through 4...
Are you talking about yourself?
I wish. But yeah, he talks through the 4, as he sees it, like the 4 main areas of designing for disability in video games, which he sees as designing for visual disabilities, designing for people who are hard of hearing, people with reduced motor function, and people with cognitive disabilities, stuff like dyslexia or like epilepsy and stuff like that. I guess that's a bit of an overlap with the visual stuff, but yeah, and they're fascinating videos to watch. I don't think any one of them goes longer than 15 minutes, so it's not going to take a huge amount out of your day. But I would highly recommend people go and watch them because they were really enlightening. Oop. And oh god, sorry, just kicking my microphone over. Sorry for the editing, Tristan.
No, you're
but
good.
Yeah, but yeah, I think as both of you touched on, it's an issue that has, like, it's become, the industry has become a lot better about it of late. I think, although there are still some companies who are not exactly dragging their feet a bit, but they're just kind of a bit slower to catch up. Like, Ben, you mentioned Nintendo, I think, and I'm reminded of, I think it was only last year, like 3 years or whatever, after the console's launch, they finally updated the Nintendo Switch firmware so that you can remap controls, which is like bottom rung.
Yeah, that's the bare minimum.
Yeah, it's like, yeah. So that's frustrating to see because, like, they're such a huge player in the industry, and like their whole thing for years and years now has been like, we want as many people as possible to play games. Like, it was the whole point of the Wii and all of the motion controlled stuff. You know, they enjoyed a huge boom in getting younger and older people playing games, and they've always said that that's like a huge part of their MO. And to see them at best like just not really getting it, and at worst not being bothered at all about,
feels like they've ignored it a lot as well, like just not noticed.
Which
Yeah.
a lot of the industry, I feel like, is too. It's like
Yeah.
it's just, especially since you said that, Max, of like how Nintendo says these things, but their actions don't necessarily show it, unlike Microsoft, where like their whole catchphrase, I'm probably gonna butcher it, but paraphrasing here, but like they're like play everywhere, and like like anyone can just play games, just play it the way you want, where you want it, and stuff like that. Phil Spencer's really pushed that. And I think in terms of accessibility, obviously we talked about that controller and stuff like that, is they're kind of putting their money where their mouth is. It's like they're like, hey, we said these things and we made them, and we're looking at you, gamers with disabilities or anything that's prohibiting you from gaming the way that you want, and and the games that you want to play, maybe that you can't touch because of this or that, and stuff like that. It's like, that's two good examples of one doing it right and one doing it not so right,
Yeah, exactly. And I think we're fortunate that there are a lot of kind of third party companies who often step in to fill that gap, but it really should be coming from the big names in the industry. Like I did a news piece a few days ago on a guy who, so he was in an accident a few years ago, and he's been paralyzed from the chest down, has severely limited motor function in his hands, and he started a YouTube channel reviewing different games for their accessibility for someone like him, and he did one on Animal Crossing New Horizons, and ended up he found an app that connected to the Switch via Bluetooth and kind of simulated the buttons of the Joy-Cons on a tablet or phone screen. So you kind of endlessly customizable, and you can put them exactly where you want them, which is fantastic and like probably very difficult to actually develop, but like now that it exists, and presumably it's fairly cheap because it's an app on an app store, it's not going to break the bank or anything. But he was able to play the game with no problems at all, even having severely limited motor function. And it's that sort of thing that's like, again, like it should be coming from the top. Like I'm really glad that there are these other companies who are stepping in, but it's clearly a problem that has a solution, or several solutions, in fact, and very few of them seem to be coming from a company like Nintendo, for example, which is very frustrating to see.
Yeah, I think the more it comes out, we're in a movement of it, and we're constantly getting more and more progress of it and stuff like that, and hopefully within the next, let's say 10 years or so, hopefully less than that, but let's just to kind of give ourselves a good window here, let's say in the next 10 years, hopefully it'll be the standard. It's like, and it'll be like, oh we're coming at this game, blah, blah, blah. And, you have your standard accessibility stuff, but that standard isn't the bare minimum. It's like the Last of Us 2 standard of like, hey, we have all these options for physical disabilities, visual, and like all these different things and whatnot, and tackling all that stuff. I remember there's I'm blanking on the person's name and who it was, but this is something for Ben and I, as we're both huge From Software guys, but there's been a lot of conversations around From Software games of making them more accessible. And sadly, people aren't, like you've touched on before, people aren't very educated on what accessibility means necessarily. So people think, what? I don't want easy mode on on Dark Souls. It's like, no, that's not what it means. It's like you can have a brutally hard game like Dark Souls, Bloodborne, stuff like that, and still it be accessible, just like having options in place for people who are colorblind or people who maybe have some, physical, disabilities and stuff like that, just placing things just for those gamers so they can play your games. You're, as a business, you want to hit every market you can possibly get, and it's just like on the financial side of things, it makes perfect sense that you would develop these things, because then you have more gamers who will buy your game, give you money,
Yeah, you're just leaving money on the table.
Exactly. And I think for the executives, that's what you need to frame it as. Like there needs to be like the kind of the people actually making the game needs to go to their bosses and go, hey, if we do this, we can make you more money. And they go, oh, let's do this then. I think that's the best way to frame it. But also, we need more people just to educate people, like educate gamers on what accessibility means and what it is and how in depth it is too. It's because there's a million different things. Like almost every night I play with a certain group of friends of mine and whatnot. We play all sorts of different games, Rainbow Six Siege, Overwatch, some Valheim, and all sorts of stuff. But it always messes up one of my friends because he is colorblind, actually. And so there's certain games that really mess him up. I know Among Us has done things to try and increase accessibility. When that came out, we were all playing it, and he would constantly, when we would go into the meeting and, you would point, be like, oh, I saw blah blah killing so and so and blah and whatnot, and he would just misname people all the time. Go, I saw this person, I swear. And it's like, no, you got the color swapped, dude. It's the wrong color. And everyone would believe him. We go, oh, it must be this person. So they eject that person, killing them. And it goes, oh, they weren't the right, they weren't the killer, they weren't the right suspect. And we're like, oh, because it's like you can't see, you don't know what you're seeing exactly and stuff like that. And it in that case, it's very funny and whatnot, but it can be very frustrating and limiting for people if you literally cannot play a game, especially like an online game like that, where it's like Among Us isn't the most competitive game in the world, but anything like that, any sort of thing where it's you versus other players, and it can be very challenging if you can't tell, like if it's a very color-based game, and it can really be limiting for you. And especially for games that blow up like that, it's like, oh man, I want to catch on the craze of the game and the trend and whatnot, and I can't, and that sucks. Like we said, gaming should be for everyone. And sorry, Ben, what were you gonna say?
No, I just have a bit more sympathy with that Among Us team, because there's like 4 of them, and then suddenly they became famous. I think, like, I don't need Nintendo to make an adaptive controller, because you can use the Microsoft one with the Switch or with the PlayStation. It's completely open. I just kind of think they should be banging the drum and leading the way, as they are the leaders of our industry. And it feels like such an obvious thing that the community and the games press is pushing for. It feels like something that is happening among the conversations, and it just seems to fly over the head on that side. Like, I think the discussion about making From Software games more accessible is ridiculous if anybody doesn't agree with it. At the end of the day, they could put an easy mode in those games. If that's the only thing they do to make it more accessible, great. More people should play them, and people who find them too hard should be given an easier route in. And
if people are unhappy about it, well, guess what? You don't have to play easy mode. If it's not for you, it's not about you. And there's people who are like, what? No, this is about me. I go, no, it's not. It's not about you.
And again, it's like people approach these discussions as though somehow the addition of one thing means like the subtraction of another. Like if Dark Souls has an easy mode, then it means that you can't play it on normal mode anymore. And no, of course that's not the case. That's ridiculous. Why would you even think that?
And also, people
does it detract from you?
Also, it doesn't need to mean easy mode. It's like people just assume saying like something is accessible means, oh, that must mean it's really easy. It's nope, that's not at all what it means. But for a long time, that was the definition of it in terms of games. It's like, well, this game's pretty accessible, I think you would enjoy it. Basically meaning, oh, this game's not that hard, you can get through it. You're not gonna have a tough time.
Easy to get into.
And it's like, no, we need to really define what these words mean and really integrate it into our language as gamers, because if you say DLC or FPS or whatever, any gamer is going to understand what you're talking about. Now we need to do that for words that actually matter, and not just like, oh, what kind of game is that? And you go RPG or whatever, and you go, oh, okay. It's like we need the words that actually have a lot of depth and a lot of something that's going to actually impact people's experiences and people's lives as gamers, and not just RPG versus FPS or whatever.
I think the Dark Souls community is especially egregious, though. The Souls community,
agreed.
Because they're the type of people
they are
who
very
say,
gatekeepy, aren't they?
They're like, oh, I finished the game without summoning, and therefore I'm better than the other people who didn't. And it's literally a mechanic in the game. Like, I've love Dark Souls so much I did it without summoning, and I did it with summoning. It's much more fun to summon people because that's the point. That's how the game's built.
I wrote a whole article on what I think is the best on people can find on KeenGamer of like what I find the best way to consume those games. And one of the things I talked about was playing it with a friend. The only From Software game I've beaten by myself is Demon Souls. Even then, I summoned some random people to help on a boss or two. But Dark Souls 3, I've beaten that game countless times. I'm playing it through again for the first time on PC. Before I beat it a million times on PS4. I've mentioned this on the podcast before because I'm obsessed and I have a problem. But I'm still doing it despite playing that game so many times. And now I'm using Magic for the first time because Magic is super OP and it essentially does put the game on easy mode. That's how I beat Demon Souls. I wouldn't have been able to beat Demon Souls mostly by myself, if it wasn't for Magic. But even then, I'm still playing it with my friend. That's the only time I'm playing it. It's just with my friend, just so we can summon each other and get each other through it. He can play it alone, but he knows I'm too intimidated by it and stuff like that. But it's just the way I like to play these games, and it's fun. I like playing with a friend and conquering giant bosses that are excruciatingly hard and stuff like that with a buddy is just the way I like to play that game. And that's the big thing about video games. It's great. At least a lot of games, there's different ways to play games. And if you like to play a game a certain way, do it. There are weird people in this community who are like, no, this is not the way to play that game. Well, does it affect you? No, it doesn't. All right, you're not playing this game you're not summoning people, so move on.
Yeah, like I saw a guy beat Breath of the Wild with his feet. That doesn't mean that everyone has to do it.
Yeah, exactly.
It's like, I think people forget games are built to be played in different ways as well. Like Dark Souls is a great example. There's easier ways to play Dark Souls and harder ways, depending on your build. There's also like, I think about Dragon Quest 11. Everyone said it was too easy, but you don't have to fight any of the monsters in that game, so therefore you don't have to level up. So therefore the game can be as hard as you want it to be. So it's like, it's not too easy. You're fighting too many monsters. Like the game is very malleable and very clearly like, you're in charge. And I think people kind of just decide that their experience is the only experience that anybody could have. And I think it speaks to the same thing of gatekeeping. But it's like they play the game and they're like, so this is what it is. Whereas games are very, very multifaceted things and different for every single person, I think at least. I don't think me or Tristan will have ever played the same Dark Souls game, yet we've played the same Dark Souls games, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, exactly.
So,
absolutely.
I think that's something that people should remember in every conversation, in most things, but especially in games. Like, people have very different experiences of the same thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, the Souls games are really... They seem like a really fascinating catalyst to me about a lot of these discussions about accessibility and difficulty levels and adaptive difficulty and stuff. And the thing I always come back to with them is that despite what so many people say, I don't think the point of games like Dark Souls and Bloodborne and Sekiro is that they are hard. Like, that's kind of the very, very top level thing. Like
it's very surface level.
Yeah,
kind of stuff,
but it's about like it being challenging and you persevering and overcoming that challenge. And so there's an interview I read this afternoon with Hidetaka Miyazaki, who's the brains behind the Souls games. And in that interview, it was around the time of the release of Dark Souls 3, I think. He specifies that he considers there to be a difference between something being difficult and something being unreasonable. And it was something that when Dark Souls 3 was in development, he would occasionally bring up some of the other developers on and be like, look, this is what I would consider to be unreasonable. Like, it's not an actual like fun, cathartic Dark Souls experience. It's just unfair. And people aren't going to enjoy that. That's not actually why they enjoy the game. So maybe we tweak it in this way and it makes it a lot more satisfying. And I think the crux of the accessibility conversation around the Souls games for me comes down to what is difficult for one person, like normal mode Dark Souls, is unreasonable for someone else, like say if you have like a physical disability, like reduced reaction speed, or like you can't, like you don't have the right sort of controller for it, or you might have a mental disability, like you might have difficulty in parsing what's going on screen, or like reading the signals that the enemy is giving about what attack that they're going to be doing, or just kind of suffering from sensory overload or something. And if you can tweak some of those things to make the situation still challenging, but like for this other person, like you kind of reduce one aspect of it, say kind of maybe, I don't know, make the window before you get hit by a particular attack slightly wider, like make that an option that people can turn on or off or whatever, then you've got more people now who can enjoy the game and play through it. And if you don't want to do that, then you don't have to switch on the option. Like that's fine.
Well,
Dark Souls.
Sorry, go ahead, Ben.
Dark Souls is unfair if you can't read all the things that it's trying to tell you.
Exactly.
And if the player can't read that, it needs to be made easier. It's also unfair if you can't do the action you want to do to react as quickly as the game wants you to do it. And like, I think that's why lots of people find certain bosses harder than other people, because certain bosses require different things very slightly. But people with physical or mental disabilities need those things more changed, like to the individual. Exactly. And the game is constantly unfair if you can't see what the enemy's doing because of sensory overload or something. That just means the whole game's unfair, because the point of it is watching what an enemy does. So those things have to be in every game, in my opinion. And you have to have the ability to, like, I don't know, put an outline around an enemy or slow down certain animations, just because, I don't know, there's something inclusive about games, even Dark Souls.
Yeah, and
Dark Souls community is like about bringing people in, I think.
Yeah, like when you look at like, hey, I'm stuck on this boss, what's a good way to do it? And when that community is good, it's like, oh, I found if you go through this corridor and you hit this wall, it will uncover a secret passage. Or if, hey, you're stuck on this boss, this is like a good way to do it, and stuff like that, like really good tips and stuff like that. Something I do want to mention though, it's like, because people think the difficulty settings need to change in terms of what we define it as, because the easy, normal, hard mode thing is out of date completely. At least I think it maybe depends on the type of game you're playing, but like Shadow of the Tomb Raider had a very extensive difficulty system. So it had the main difficulty thing, I think it was easy, normal, hard, and deadly obsession, but you can go deeper than that to change the difficulty: combat, exploration, and puzzles. So if you have some issue, whatever your issue may be, mental, physical, whatever, regarding maybe combat, and you can adjust the combat so it's easier, but then you really do want those brain teasing kind of puzzles and stuff like that. So you set that to the hardest difficulty, and maybe exploration, you set it somewhere towards the middle, whatever fits your needs or whatever. And I think that's a great idea to implement, especially for like a Souls game, or really any game at all. Like, you can just be like, hey, this game has a lot of exploration, a lot of puzzles, a lot of combat. If you're really into combat and you're not really into puzzles, for whatever reason, maybe you have some sort of issue, or maybe it is just simply you're not a big puzzle person. It's just not your taste. So you can set the puzzle thing to super easy. You can breeze right through it, and the combat, you can have a very challenging experience, or whatever you want. And I think that's a brilliant idea. And I personally didn't really like Shadow of the Tomb Raider, but I thought that the steps that game made were really great, and I wish more people would like kind of look to games that are doing it right and go, okay, they're doing it. Last of Us 2 does this stuff really well. Shadow of the Tomb Raider is doing this stuff really well. How can we take that into our game, but also how can we innovate on it and make it even more accessible and keep kind of pushing the boundaries of it, instead of just settling being like, oh, we have a colorblind mode, we're good. No, you gotta keep pushing it and get people who are really thoughtful about stuff. And I think that when it comes to game development too, it's just like, and this goes into a lot of other things too regarding hiring and whatnot, but hiring people who have these disabilities is also a great way to circulate the conversation internally at these studios instead of having IGN write an article on it, or have podcasters like us, or maybe just your average gamer tweeting about it, and actually start those conversations internally and someone being like, hey, I'm a game developer, I'm working for you guys, I'm a huge gamer myself, but these are issues I have, and maybe my personal experience can help educate the rest of the staff and what we can do for our next big project and what we can do in terms of new options and stuff like that. I think is also an important way to get the conversation going and get actual actions taken internally for a development studio or a publisher, really whoever.
Yeah. I think we've seen bits and bobs of that happening. Like some of the people I follow on Twitter, I think like Steve Saylor and people like that have been brought on as like disability advisors, or probably a different word for it, but basically like we want to make sure this is as open as possible. And all that seems to be coming out of it, like Assassin's Creed, which I'm playing through at the moment, has pretty good, it's not as good as it could be, kind of mutable things, like you can change the stealth difficulty, the exploration difficulty, and the combat difficulty, and things like that. So it's pretty changeable, but like all that seems to me to be the answer is make as much of your game a slider as you can. Like, and then that seems to really be the reality of it. Like, there's very few things, like I'm sure like word puzzles must be very difficult to change the difficulty of if it's based in like language. So the only way to do that is give a hint button and then give an answer button. Like if somebody's taking long on it, be like, do you need a hint? And if the hint doesn't help them, be like, you can get the answer if you need. Like things like that I think would be like really nice. I mean, I was playing through there's a story game on Xbox called Call of the Sea. Pretty lovely game. Yeah, I liked it, but there was one puzzle that just stumped me, and it's not that difficult a game. I didn't have trouble with any of it other than one, and it really stilted and halted the story for me. And on a basic gameplay level, I would have liked to be able to just keep flowing with the story. I wouldn't have felt too sad about not knowing how to solve the puzzle, but I couldn't. And the story stopped flowing for me for that moment, and it kind of muted the ending of the game for me because of that. And that's just me on a gameplay level, without a disability, without any serious barrier to solving that, just the fact that I couldn't get it. I can't imagine anything beyond just I'm stumped.
Actually, it's funny that you actually mentioned that game. We actually do have a review of that game, actually, so people can check it out. Andy J. Dobson reviewed Call of the Sea, actually, and gave it a pretty good score, actually, a solid 8. So because I knew when you said that, I was like, man, that game seems really familiar, and I looked it up, saw screenshots, stuff like that. It looks really pretty. Something that I was recently playing though, and like you, Ben, I have a tough time with puzzles. It's not because of disability or anything. I'm just dumb. That's my problem. I'm playing through Uncharted 4 right now, and like there was a puzzle. I'm like, I was just racking my brain trying to figure out and whatnot, and I just did every possible maneuver I could possibly do to get through it, and I was like, eventually I was able to get through just because I pressed everything I needed to press, and eventually the character was like, oh, you got it. I'm like, all right, sweet. But I'm just dumb. That's basically it. But what was cool in because I recently played Spider-Man the remaster, and then I played through Miles Morales. And it's not an option I put on personally, just because it doesn't. I don't think the puzzles in that game are that difficult, but there is a thing where it's like, oh, for the QTEs, you can just have them be automatic. You don't have to like press anything or whatever in your solid. Or it's like, hey, you can just skip different puzzles and stuff like that. Not that there's a whole lot in Spider-Man, but there's a couple here and there, and it's like, hey, if you want, you can skip it. It's no big deal. I'm like, oh, cool. It's not so hard for me personally. I'm an idiot, but I'm not that dumb. At least with Spider-Man. Uncharted's another thing. I probably would get the pass, puzzle free pass or whatever if I could, just because I'm an idiot. But it's stuff like that I think is really helpful. And it's like, hey, you can just skip this thing, or hey, this QTE, maybe your reflexes aren't as good, or maybe whatever reason this is too much for you or whatever. So like, hey, you can just have it automatic. So there is no QTE. Stuff like that is like huge.
And
yeah,
I think,
and as you say, like they're not forcing it on anybody. It's there for people who want to take or need to take advantage of it. But if you're not one of those people, just leave the setting alone in the options and you're fine. You can play the game your way.
Yeah, you'll literally forget about it if you never look at that option. It's like, exactly. Don't go into options, don't go under accessibility. You're good. That's what it is. You'll never know what's under the accessibility option because you don't need it or you don't want it or whatever. And it's just like, I don't know, but it's just a weird human trait of people trying to make things about them when it's not about them.
Yeah.
I fell in love with Celeste when it came out. Absolutely obsessed with it. Played all of it. And that game is the kind of thing I was talking about where you can change so many different aspects of that to make it easier.
Yeah,
I didn't think about them at all.
Mode, isn't it?
Yeah, but I didn't think about them at all. I knew they were there, but I thought this is the game I want to play, so I'm going to play it like that. I think some people think that assist modes are like cheats and they're going to do the mother load cheat over and over again and get loads of money and ruin the game for themselves. But I think any adult has self-control. Maybe if you're 12, it's very easy to be playing a game and want to cheat all the time. But I don't know. I think we know how we like to consume games and we should be allowed to do it as a grown-up in the way that's best for us.
Are you saying you're a responsible adult who can make his own decisions and decide, hey, I don't want to play this game this way, so I'm going to play it the way I want to play it instead of complaining about it on Twitter and
absurd.
People.
Get out.
Yeah. Wow.
That's
no
crazy,
place for
man.
rational human beings on this podcast.
I'm only just a responsible adult, but just enough to know that Celeste is great, even though it has an in-depth assist mode.
I know it's a little off topic, but just because you mentioned Celeste, I never played it. I know people love that game.
You really should.
It's on Game Pass.
I literally said that just to get that reaction in event. I'm satisfied. We can move forward. Maybe I'll play it. Maybe.
Is it on Game Pass for PC? It was on Game Pass on Xbox. I don't know if it's on PC, but play it.
I'll check it right now.
Sure.
Because
it's not particularly expensive anyway.
I know, but my big gripe with damn Game Pass is that it's like not everything. Some things are on Xbox, some things are on PC, and it's so annoying. I'm like, why? Why are you like this Game Pass? But anyways, tangent aside. I might check it out.
Get on Celeste, it's amazing. One of my favorite games ever.
Same. I'm a huge Celeste fan, and so same. Like my first time through the game, I didn't touch the assist mode, although I knew it was there, and so I think, if I'm remembering correctly, you kind of have to choose it like when you start a new game if you want to activate assist mode. Because I remember halfway through my first game where I hadn't done that, I opened the options because I was like curious to see what it was like, and I couldn't access it. But if you do that at the beginning, then it's there with you for the whole.
I think it's
game.
It's like turning on subtitles when you start a game. Like it's the first thing it shows you, but then if you just don't click it, it doesn't appear later on.
But it's great. Like so the thing that I really liked about Celeste's assist mode is that when you when they do first give you the option to turn it on, they say they address this whole question of difficulty levels and the vision of the developers and stuff, and they say so look, we designed this game to be challenging, but we never want it to be frustrating for people, and we want as many people as possible to experience it. So if you'd like, we can activate assist mode, and it gives you some options that might help you if you feel like you might need them. That's fine. No judgment from us. Go nuts. And I think that's such a nice way of doing it, and it's really important, I think, when it comes to accessibility and how it's so intricately linked with the idea of difficulty levels and stuff, because there's still some games, it was a lot more prevalent in the shooters of the 90s and the early 2000s, but there are still some that's if you can play on easy mode, which is for babies, you huge baby. It's
well, I just played through I just played through Wolfenstein: The New Order, and I played it on normal. But if you go down to easy, it puts like a dummy and a baby hat on BJ Blazkowicz, and it's just like, grow up. Like,
come on.
Like, the person who's clicking on this easy mode now hates you. Like, this person wasn't going on easy mode,
but it's a little funny. To be fair, I found it a little funny, but I know it's something that you would think would be in a game like in the early 2000s, not a game made.
It's a Duke Nukem kind of thing, and nobody wants to do a Duke Nukem kind of thing in 2020, 2021.
No. Yeah, they put that whole thing to the ground.
Yeah,
yikes.
Yeah, no, I think it's kind of funny, but like, who's the person who's like gonna laugh at that is already clicking on the hard mode.
Yeah,
they're not going near it. They're just gonna slide down to look at the funny photo, then go back to it. But the person who needs that is just not gonna like your game. Yeah, and I think that's the point of it. Like, that joke isn't going to land with anybody who needs the easy mode, which would have been me when I was 12. I couldn't play shooters, 13, but I wouldn't have wanted to play that game on easy, and I just wouldn't have enjoyed it. So I don't know. Like, it just seems quite nasty to the people who actually need it.
Yeah, and you could have like little funny things about the difficulty settings, but there's a way to do it that's not like insulting people, you know?
Yeah.
And it's like, someone should have been like, hey, maybe we change this up to not be kind of demeaning. Just like just a little alteration. Just maybe take out the pinky or something, you know? It's literally anything.
Make it not so condescending and
absolutely
insulting. Like, sometimes people just want to play easy mode. Like even like this is another thing that gets me about a lot of accessibility options. Like, a lot of them are often beneficial, or at least a bit handy for people who don't necessarily like need them. Like, sometimes I want to play a game on the easy mode because I'm not really in the mood or the right headspace to kind of play through something that might just be a bit too much.
It also
for what I want at that time.
For accessibility options too, it's like or difficulty options, it can really help our jobs too. Like like for people who don't need it, it could really help. Because I saw someone, I can't remember. I assume that they were from IGN, because I think that's probably most of the games journalists I follow. Either way, they were posting like, hey, just trying to get all the collectibles in Last of Us 2, and they had the accessibility option, so it highlight is everything. All the characters were just blue silhouettes and all this stuff, you know, and the world didn't look like an actual world, you know, because they had all the accessibility options on. But there's like these like cards or whatever that you need to collect. It's one of the collectibles in that game. That has a lot of really cool collectibles, and it highlight in like a yellow silhouette, and it's like, oh, there it is, you know, and it's like that's really helpful, and it's so great. I don't turn on those for work related reasons, but I will put them on for things that are like difficulty and whatnot, and like, okay, I need to make this guide. I'm gonna tone down the difficulty to easy just so I can get through this level and write up like, how do you do X thing in X game or whatever, you know, stuff like that is just like, it's super helpful. Or if you're doing a review and you're playing on normal, you have a feel for normal, and you're on the last act of the game, and you just need to get through it just for the review, then swatch it to easy, you know, and then you can go, okay, I got the ending, I have this satisfaction of the story arc or whatever, and now I can write my review and stuff like that. It can be very beneficial for people who don't need it, depending on what your circumstances are. Especially for us.
I remember when Xenoblade Chronicles Definitive Edition came out. I reviewed that for the site, and I was about 20 hours in after a week, and it's about a 50-hour game, and I was sitting there kind of just thinking, oh, I'm not going to do this in time for it to really matter that much. And I was playing on the expert mode because again, like I said earlier, I'm an idiot.
Because you're an expert.
I'm definitely not an expert at that game. And so I just whacked it down to easy and blasted through it, and had such a fun time with that game. I love that game, and especially the final third. It can feel like a bit of a slog because it's so long and it's a JRPG, but the story's at its best. So if you can, play the first bit, get a feel for the combat, level up, have a bit of a challenge, but then you're like getting tired of this game, you can actually kind of race through the last bit. Well, not race, it's still a JRPG, but you can get through it quicker than you would have.
Walk at a normal pace through the last bit.
I don't think I would have enjoyed, or maybe I wouldn't have even finished that game if it wasn't for the fact that I could do that and also do it on the fly. It wasn't like restart this whole chapter or anything like that. I could just literally do it, and at the end, as long as I wasn't in a battle, I could do it. And I think that's like, I don't see what the big deal about that is. I think Dark Souls or any game that is meant to be hard and doesn't have it could just add it. Make the enemies have less health and make me have more health.
And if you don't want to put it on, then don't.
Yeah, and make my weapon hurt more and make theirs hurt less. Like,
there's a million things you can do, you know?
Yeah.
Literally, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I have to say, I'm a real sucker for some good subtitles. Like, I really weirdly enjoy playing a game with subtitles because it always makes me feel like I'm not missing anything. Like a lot of the kind of incidental conversations and stuff that, like, especially if I'm playing at home, and like I don't always have the sound on super loud, or I'm wearing headphones or whatever. So sometimes it's quite quiet, and it's nice to know that like I can still see and understand everything that's happening on the screen, and it's really satisfying to get a game with really well designed subtitles as well, like ones that follow the flow of the delivery and the voice acting really well as well. Like with you know, sometimes there's a reveal or there's like a funny joke with a punchline or whatever, and if you just have it all there on screen in one block, then you know it's good and you can read it, but it kind of loses a little something for me, and it makes it slightly lesser than having the actual voice acting, you know.
A game that has issue. Sorry, Ben, go ahead.
I was just saying, you have that issue all the time in Japanese games. If you play them in Japanese with English subtitles, there's often a big villain reveal that's the last word in the Japanese sentence, but the way it's been localized puts it as the second word in the English sentence. And things like that happen all the time with the subtitles. You're reading it and you think, oh, there's a big reveal, and then the shot switches to this guy who looks really evil, and you're like, oh, it wasn't timed quite right.
Yeah, I see that all the time with subtitles aren't timed right. A game that has great subtitles, though, is The Last of Us Part 2. And yes, I'm going to bring up that game again. But the subtitles in that game are great. Not only has all the basic options, stuff like that, but you can change like color of like the speaker and stuff like that, or have it tell you who the speaker is. And that's also a great thing, too.
Yeah, that's real. That's real helpful.
It's like I had to really rush through that game because I one wrote a review for it, and two, I had to do a spoiler cast back when David was the host of the podcast, and so I had to make sure I got the game done. I think, yeah, I got it for that weekend and stuff like that. But then I think we're recording on Tuesday, like how we record now, and I had to make sure I got through that game as quickly as possible and stuff like that. Thankfully, it's not that long a game. I think I got through it in like 24, 25 hours or whatever. But it was great because when I was playing late at night and I didn't want to disturb my family and stuff like that, because that game is horribly gruesome and stuff like that, and hearing people horrible sounds of death and whatnot. So I just turned the sound lower and had the subtitles on, and it really helps out big time.
Yeah. I was replaying The Outer Worlds as well recently.
Of course you are.
Yeah. And the first time I played that game, either I didn't notice it or it wasn't there, but I always thought the text in this game is so small. And I'm pretty sure you can change it. And now you can change it. I'm sure I'm like 99% certain it was added after I played the game.
I think you might be right. I feel like I remember reading that somewhere.
And I whacked it up like +6 from the neutral point, like went up and up and up. And I was just like, this is amazing. The bigger, the better. Like, and it like genuinely made quite a big difference to the game. It felt like I could look at the characters speaking more, because like it was less like refocusing up and down and things. And like, that was like, I was really excited to see that. And I don't have any visual impairments other than what my glasses fix. So like,
I do want to comment. You were right, because you were kind of a little uncertain if that was true. Yeah, there's a Polygon article actually from October 25th, 2019, and on the same day there is a Reddit thread too on the Outer Worlds saying the subtitle font is awful, and the Polygon article says that Outer Worlds text is too small, and so people can check that out too. And then It seemed like it was around March when they fixed it, or around that time, because there's like a Kotaku article basically saying, hey, the font size is about to get bigger, and that there's an update coming and stuff like that. So yeah, it was definitely updated.
Yeah.
Great.
And
Months
like
after
stuff
the
like
game
that
release.
and things like that like changed the game for me in like an exciting way, and that's for somebody who doesn't have a disability. So I can't imagine the feeling of delight anybody with a disability must have when their lives made even slightly easier. So that's like kind of the best way I think of it, is it's like just changing this text size made me happy. Imagine what it does to somebody with like serious visual impairments. Changes their life. It gives them the ability to play amazing games. And I think that's where the main place the discussion needs to come from, is like, who wouldn't want you to play their game?
Yeah.
Like, you should, as a developer, I assume you want everybody to play your game, unless they're evil. That's the only way I could think of like wanting to say somebody can't. Like, you're evil, so you don't get it. That's the only way I could put it in my head.
Yeah. Like I feel like a lot of people like to try and put words in Miyazaki's mouth about the Souls games, about like what kind of players he wants playing his games. But from the handful of interviews and stuff that I've read with him, like, that doesn't seem to match up at all. Like,
no, not at all.
He loves making games, and he loves people playing his games. And as we touched on before, like, he doesn't want them to be hard just for the sake of them being difficult.
Yeah, and we've all played games like that too. We've all played games that are unfair at being hard. And there's games that are fair but hard.
Worse.
They're not fun.
The unfair games are a lot worse. Yeah.
But yeah, like, there's.
But I think Souls games and Celeste come from the same place. I think they are like the same vibe. Like, Celeste has that option, but Celeste knows it's meant to be challenging. They're both games about overcoming challenge. Like, their stories kind of are intertwined with the idea of difficulty.
Yeah.
Souls does that, and Celeste does that, and Celeste keeps it with the accessibility option. So there's proof that you can have the hard game that's challenging for a reason, but make it easier for certain people and not lose the meaning of it, because the meaning of Celeste came through for a lot of people very strongly. And I'm sure the same would be said for a lot of other games that are hard.
Yeah. And for all the discussions swirling around the Souls games, like, I don't know if I have seen anybody complaining about Celeste having an assist mode. And I don't know if I've seen anybody saying, oh yeah, Celeste, that really famously easy game. Like, it just doesn't happen. So people should stop being so precious about the Souls games, I reckon.
Yeah.
Or just, games in general. Just like, hey,
games in general.
Open the doors. Open the doors.
I think a lot of Souls players seem to think that they discovered the Souls games, whereas like none of them will have played Demon's Souls when it came out, or at least not none of them, but most of them will have found out around maybe Dark Souls 1 and thought, oh, I'm one of so few people who's found this thing, and they're probably quite precious about it because now it's like a big thing and they're the hipsters who are there first.
Yeah.
That's at least that's what the vibe I get.
It's exactly that.
You nailed it.
But yeah, like, there's so much to this subject, honestly. Like, we've talked for the better part of an hour about it, and I feel like we've still kind of barely scratched the surface. But I think ultimately,
especially as people who don't have like those issues, and stuff like that.
That's like the other main thing. Like, I mean, I can't speak for either of you, but I don't have a disability of my own. I'm merely talking from like what I've read and watched and listened to.
Yeah.
But ultimately, all of us, like designers and players and everyone involved in the industry, should be seeking out and listening to people with disabilities who, and there are plenty of them who are clamoring to be heard. We all, I think, just kind of need to. There are a lot of outlets and individuals online who are super easy to find. Like I mentioned, Mark Brown's Designing for Disability series earlier. Just going to plug that again because that's very good. There are sites like Can I Play That, which is a great resource, and there are loads of disability focused games people. Like I think Ben, you mentioned Steve Saylor earlier, and there are game designers who are specifically focused, particularly on accessibility. People like Ian Hamilton and Cherry Thompson. You can find all of them on Twitter and various other outlets, and then through them you can find others as well. So I would heartily encourage all of our listeners, and I hope you guys would agree with me, like seek out these people and see what they're saying and just learn a bit more about the ideas and the concepts behind accessibility in games. It's hugely important.
Like I said at the beginning, I already agreed that accessibility should be a thing, but until I listened and read about it, I didn't understand how much there was to the conversation. And I think just having that accessing that information then really changes the way you understand games, and how much they need to do really to help people.
Absolutely. Yeah. But yeah, I think that'll about do it for us for today, unless you guys have any last nuggets of wisdom to add.
I should insist that Tristan plays Celeste.
Yes, I second this.
One day play it. It is on my Steam wishlist now.
I'm not going to play Sunset Overdrive until you play Celeste. How about that?
All right. I have to play it.
That's
now.
fair.
It's fair. It is fair. Yeah, I think the last thing to say is rather than listen to us, go listen to people who actually have disabilities, like you mentioned, Steve Saylor and some of these other people and stuff like that. And it's like, listen, really listen to people and stuff like that. If you're not in that loop of that conversation, well, you should be, and educate yourself. It's not that hard, honestly.
Yeah.
And make games for everyone. Let's do that.
Absolutely. Educating yourself is very cool to do, and you should all do it.
Absolutely.
It's great fun as well.
Yes, it's excellent fun. But yeah, that's about all we've got time for today. Thank you all so much for listening. You can catch the KeenGamer podcast every Thursday on KeenGamer.com. We've got a rotating cast of delightful video game media professionals who will be caressing your ears with wonderful chat. And yeah, go educate yourselves. Have a wonderful weekend, and happy Monster Hunter Day. See you next time.
Happy Monster Hunter Day, and way to use the word caressing, Max.
That's going to be the new sign off, is caressing. Every week we have to put it in at the end.
What have I done?
I'm not doing it. All right, listeners, we'll see you next time. Thank you.